Well, welcome everyone. I'm Michael Quinn Patton, coming to you from the North Woods of Minnesota, uh, and am delighted to have you join us today for another Blue Marble webinar that's connecting the various local and global patterns and trends. Glenn Page, as part of the Blue Marble team, has been especially effective in providing leadership on how we take these Blue Marble ideas and connect them to things that are happening in particular ecosystems and particular niches. And he's going to be introducing folks today, Isabel and Eduard, who will take us deep into what this means. So without further delay, I want to appreciate and thank Isabel and Eduard for being a part of this. Glenn, for your leadership in this. Take it away.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Michael, and thank you everyone for showing up. This is a really important and critical time, both as we approach summer in the Northern Hemisphere and winter in the Southern Hemisphere. It's really about deepening our connection to place in a time of global pandemic. We're spending a lot more time at home. We're spending a lot more time in our local communities, at least I am, and really in many ways reconnecting. And what this opens up is a sense-making, both around our individual selves, our own pathways of transformation, but our sense of our home, our place, our connection to what's in our backyard, our community. We know food systems must become more locally derived. We know education systems, healthcare systems, transportation systems, tourism systems. So as we think about the kinds of change that's needed, we need to have transformation systems that are rooted in place. So we have absolutely fantastic guests today to speak to this issue. And it actually follows from the last webinar. If you recall, we had Kofi Agboga from the Yenampoano Fisheries Program in Ghana, and we had Alistair Harris from Blue Ventures. And both of them spoke about the importance of place regarding small-scale fisheries and the issues regarding how do we measure and how do we understand the transformation systems within small-scale fisheries. Well, today we're actually going to take a journey into our own backyards. We're going to move from the marine into the terrestrial, but with an eye to the coast. And we're going to be understanding more about what it means to be connected to our bioregions, the biological regions that we're part of. So we have two esteemed experts in this field, Isabel Carlisle, a dear friend from Totnes, South Devon, UK, and Eduard Müller in Costa Rica. And so I'm going to turn the dials over to Isabel to lead us into this idea, this concept of bioregioning, which is really sourced from ancient wisdom, but she's one of the global leaders to really bring this concept further forward and work deeply at a local scale. So Isabel, welcome.
Thank you so much, Glenn and Michael. Really delighted to be here. I am going to tell you about the South Devon bioregion, and I wanted to preface it by saying that I arrived in the space of working on systems change at regional scale really intuitively. And I want to kind of bring that up front because so much of what we do seems to be kind of have certainty about it or scientific techniques and methods about it. And I just wanted to make sure that I mentioned this kind of importance of the arts and in intuitive working, because as the title for this webinar suggested, we're working along a very old idea, an old idea whose time has come back. And how do we work in the old ways is a question that we're holding in South Devon. So South Devon, for those of you who don't know where it is, it's the bump in southwest England. So the part of southwest England that sticks out into the sea, as Cornwall at the far end has a kind of bump halfway down on the south side, and that is South Devon. And our bioregion is defined by water. We've got the English Channel on the south side, we've got the springs from which our rivers arise on Dartmoor in the north. We've got the River Tamar to the west and the River Tean to the east. And you can cover our bioregion, which is roughly 40 miles across in any direction, in around 1.5 hours, 2 hours in a car. And we reckon we have about 538,000 people living here. We have rural and we have urban. We've got extremes of beauty, but also extremes of poverty as well. So we're a very interesting region in the way that we are working with the kind of fabric of what has been going on in this place for over 4,000 years. Because this was an important place in the Bronze Age. People have been shaping this land for 4,000 years or more. And we're very curious about what is the long timeline on this, how are people shaping land now, and how is land shaping people. So what is the bioregion? Glenn gave us a mini introduction to bioregions. So according to the World Resources Institute, which has a very good definition of this, a bioregion has a unity of geology, geography, land use, climate, and so on, but it also has a coherence of culture. So it's this kind of coming together of place and culture that makes the place unique, and when one can then say it has an identity as a bioregion. And we're working at this scale in order to build resilience. COVID-19 has been a great revealer of lack of resilience. The lack of resilience in so many of our systems. Here in England, we are a very centrally governed state. We're governed from Westminster. I don't think, have enough devolution to the regions. Personally, I'd love to see a greater liberation of the regions to be able to work more independently. So what I'm going to do is kind of really map out how we got to be where we are now in terms of the Bioregional Learning Centre. So the Bioregional Learning Centre emerged partly from a course at Schumacher College, which was all about bioregions and regenerative design that happened 4 years ago. And from that came an impetus to create the Bioregional Learning Centre. And what we started to do was just to map out what was going on. All these different systems that exist in our place, whether they are food systems or water systems, energy systems, transport systems, health systems, and so on. And to find out really who are the change leaders in those places, who's making a difference in those systems, who's thinking long-term about resilience. I think now is an extraordinary time. We know we have an urgency about coming up with solutions as to how we become more resilient locally, but we also have, if you like, a kind of, perhaps a lack of capacity to think about change at government level. And I see a lot of energy at the level of civil society on the ground, bringing change about. Organizations that are NGOs, non-government organizations, working in these different systems to create exciting new futures. In this September, we ran a learning journey around South Devon. We took people for 6 days, including Glenn, which was fantastic to have him there, around South Devon to look at what we call the green shoots of resilience. And we visited different places. We went to Plymouth, which is one of our local cities. We went up to Dartmoor, which is still quite wild, quite sparse with hill farming. We went down to the sea. We looked at our sea defenses and at fishing. And we looked at farming in the central part of this region and farming systems and how they're organized. And having many conversations with different people, whether it was with Southwest Water, which is our local water company up on Dartmoor, looking at one of the reservoirs that supplies us with drinking water, and getting to understand how water is moved around and what the impact of climate change will be if we have droughts in the summer and if we have more rain than we can cope with in the winter. How do we rebalance things out? So it's a combination of infrastructure and behavior change. So having run the resilience learning journey, reflected on what we found, published a booklet, which was a report on the journey, and also putting together a short film, which really portrayed how we think of working in systems. That's really helped us set the scene for the next part of the evolution of our work. And there are 3 different strands to this part. One is to call together a Resilience Summit in probably about 8 months' time from now, which brings together people from many different sectors, so food, energy, water, waste, but also from academia, from civil society, from business, and from other places, governance especially, to join us in thinking through how we can come up with a resilient strategy for our region that makes sense. And so a lot of our work really is kind of thinking about how we speak across borders. How do we break down the walls between different silos? How do we get academia talking to civil society? How do we do a co-design process so that everybody feels that they own a part of that and can find their role in that? And from that, we hope to emerge with a core team that takes the strategy forward, with field teams who are looking at very specific projects that we could do, whether it's around mental health in communities and how do we help communities stay more resilient, or how we look at food systems in our local area. And then task teams who are tasked and funded to actually carry out the projects that we've collectively agreed need to be done in order to move us towards resilience. So I wanted to share a picture right now. I was going to do my share screen. Right. Yeah. Can you see that image in
yes,
your?
Yes, we can. Looking well.
Great. So we've been working along the line of and considering what does bioregioning mean? And this is a graphic that shows you what you would see in a flourishing bioregion. All these things would be happening. And many of these things are already happening in South Devon. They're probably already happening where you live as well. Things like green manufacturing, or creating baselines of health, or farm-to-table food platforms, place regenerating tourism. So these are things we've identified as areas we want to work on. But the challenge, of course, is how do we connect it all up? How do we join the dots and make it into a connected up, holistic strategy? And another part, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Another part, the second part of the resilience project that we're undertaking is the idea of a backroom. We're working very much with communities and civil society. Many of those communities in our area who have already formed groups to do with climate change and climate resilience are asking for some kind of support in how they can map and measure and model and baseline and so on. And what we want to do is to create a community-facing learning lab with expertise in it, which communities can call on in order to be able to do much of this mapping and measuring and sharing of information with each other, with the sense that these communities can, in that way, become agents of their own future to a much greater extent than just relying on what government can do. We think we're entering an era when we need to get beyond assuming that government is going to do everything for us. And then we also are looking at leadership. What does leadership look like in systems change? How do you do that bit? So I'm going to share my screen again. So we have been defining what bioregioning is. How do you actually do it? What are the competencies? What are the capacities you need? So we've done it like as a game, pick any card for positive change. And we've come up with 9 different ways in which to work in the bioregion. So it's not so much what you do as how you do it. So establish baselines, tell how-to stories, share governance, collaborate, prototype and learn, map for vitality, work at the edges. We're very interested in the urban-rural divide or the urban-rural links. Seeing the whole, this capacity to zoom into the very fine granular detail of a project, but then zoom out again and see the whole picture. And of course, paying attention to systems. We recognize that these are not skills or experiences or capacities that you're taught at school or even at college. You kind of learn them through life. And we want to give people the opportunity to be able to step into what's already happening in South Devon, to learn from what's going on, to actually kind of teach from the ground upwards, as it were, as to how to lead systems change in all these different systems, and also having the overview of the meta system. So we think bioregioning is like commoning. So with the idea of the commons being a very old idea, goes back at least to medieval times, that people would be sharing common pool resources and governing common pool resources in such a way as to maintain their health without commoning, which are the activities to maintain those resources. There are no commons. Without bioregioning, there's no bioregion, or no thriving bioregion. We also are very aware that people ask us what's the easy way in to do this work, and we've come up with a graphic for that, which I'm also going to share with you. We wanted to make it quite clear that, you know, it wasn't difficult to do this. You really just step in, you start anywhere, go everywhere, you start where you live, you find out what you're passionate about. I'm just scrolling down so you can see the different things like circular economies or rewilding or conflict resolution. Find out where it's going on in your area, join up with others, look for patterns, start to see human and natural systems together, which of course go everywhere, and that interacts with where you live. So we're trying to make it fun and accessible for people. But we're also very aware that there needs to be an organization that holds the whole journey, holds it all together. And that's what the Bioregional Learning Centre has been set up to do. So that's where I'm going to stop, and I'm very happy to answer questions.
Great, well, thank you, Isabel. And I think what we'll do is we'll hold questions for now, and we'll switch over to Eduard, who will describe a bit of the Costa Rica experience. And I'd like to actually have you two have a bit of a conversation with each other, and then we'll open it up for some wider questions. And so for those who are interested in asking Isabel and Eduard some questions, be thinking about what you might put down in the chat box. So let's move down to Central America, to the isthmus that separates the Atlantic and the Pacific Seas, the lovely, lovely country of Costa Rica. Eduard, take it over.
Thank you, and thank you, Blue Marble, for this great invitation, this great opportunity to be able to share some ideas. This is all work in progress and very dynamic, and we're in times of change. So I just want to show a few slides to guide the process. So we are actually in the middle of the process of transitioning or trying to transition to a better future. 26 years ago, I was working at a national university, and I tried to implement different programs that could integrate different knowledge areas. So multidisciplinary programs is what we called it at that time. And it was just impossible because of a big rigid structure. And about 10 years ago, I actually realized that sustainability was not achievable anymore, at least not under what we consider sustainable development, and that we really needed a different pathway. And that's when we started working on regeneration. So you can see it as a bridge that connects the current model to a new model. And then nature was kind enough to send us a little sample of what could be a planetary collapse coming soon because of global change, climate change, and so on. And now we really are pressed to decide if we want to cross that bridge and go to a world of abundance and regeneration, or if we come back to our safe spot. So do we bounce back to the system that was collapsing, or do we bounce beyond to this new paradigm of development. And that is not easy to do. We base a lot of our work on the planetary boundaries approach, which defined the safe operating space for humanity, and the Center for Resilience in Stockholm has identified the main planetary changes that have already moved us into the Anthropocene. And a lot of people aren't really aware of what are the priorities. So we're trying to use this to identify what are the true priorities humanity should be working on to keep on with a safe operating space for humanity. And if we looked at the graph, biodiversity loss is one of the biggest risks we have right now for humanity. 3/4 of the terrestrial part of the planet, ecosystems are not able to provide the necessary services to keep humanity alive. And it's followed by something that a lot of people, even technical people, ignore, which is the use of fertilizers. The petrochemical industry, allied with the big universities and a lot of interests, have been able to maintain their damage to the planet under the radar. It is not one of the main issues discussed at any of the conventions right now. We're followed by land use change, which has a lot to do with our development patterns, thinking we own nature and we can change the way we want to fit our needs, and then climate change. A lot of the focus has been on climate change, but we're going to get kicked out of the planet by biodiversity loss and fertilizer use way before climate change kicks us out. And critical is that agriculture is responsible for about 80% of the planetary changes, of the global changes. Only about 30% of climate change, but the rest of the planet is degrading because of the way we produce our food. So we decided to try to use bigger metrics to, let's say, guide our process. And we've been working with the donut model that Amsterdam has now announced that we'll use to bounce beyond. And we have a lot of good friends, partners that have helped us design this process, which started basically a little bit over 2 years ago. And we look at Costa Rica's donut and we can see that we have exceeded our biophysical boundaries for the country. We are unsustainable since the beginning of the 90s. And we have achieved some social threshold, social development. If you compare different countries, this is from Leeds University, these graphs, you can compare different countries. We're actually a country that has gotten a high social development on a relatively low environmental budget. Other countries, and I question development, like Germany, where my father's from, yeah, they have 100% social development, but at a huge environmental expense. So basically, those countries have achieved their level of development by using resources from other parts of the planet. So this has been a very important way to try to define how we're going to move forward into a regenerative country. Another important issues we've been told for many years now, and scientists keep on telling us, and the conventions and all the UN system is telling us we need to learn to adapt to a changing planet. And I think that's a big mistake. We need to build the future we want. I'm not going to stay sitting in a chair waiting to learn how to live in a planet that's in collapse. And over the last few months that we gave nature a little bit of vacation has shown us how resilient it is, and it's still willing to cooperate with us. So we still have time to actually regenerate the capacity of the planet and move to a better way of living. Another important fact that we have come to realize for many, many years, actually decades of working at communities from different parts of the world, is that the amount of resources required to solve problems is an inverse triangle. So a lot of the international cooperation, the governments, NGOs, they pick the top problems, but that requires a lot of energy, a lot of expertise, a lot of funding to solve. If we actually look at the big majority of the problems, they can be resolved without external resources, without external know-how. And it actually empowers the community to move up solving their problems and getting the self-esteem back to actually be able to tackle these transformations on their own. So we don't need a huge amount of resources. So this is another very important principle. So basically we're working on reversing the donut to make the ideal donut. And as mentioned, this is done with a lot of different partners. One of our key partners for the road mapping process is Common Earth and the Regenerative Communities Network and the Common Earth Alliance. And Blue Marble, actually, also Savory Institute we're working with, and the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, the Earth Charter we've been working with for 2 decades already. Their secretary is actually in Costa Rica, which makes it easier. We're working with cryptocurrencies like seeds, and we have a lot of different local partners, and of course the donut with Kate, who's supporting us in this process. So basically, it's impossible to go in depth in these 10 to 15 minutes. But what we've done already up to now is start working on holistic cattle grazing. We're becoming a hub for Savory Institute, and also transforming our chemical agriculture and even the organic agriculture to regenerative agriculture, focus on local production, consumers and consumption, bringing them together, high diversity of foods, and even food forests. And a very important component is the assisted and natural regeneration of biological connectivity through the landscapes, trying to bring ecosystems back to their maximum potential, at least to potential production of services that can sustain humanity. We need social regeneration, so moving people from their passiveness to actually be very active, proactive in the decision-making process of their territories, of their bioregions, empowering them for local governments, and a lot of more details, which I don't have time to go in. Regenerative economics, we're working here very closely with Capital Institute, but also with the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. I don't think there will be a new economy. There will be many new economies. So every bioregion will have to actually develop their own regenerative economies, which will vary from country to country, from bioregion to bioregion. We need definitely to redesign our culture. It's being washed away by consumption. It's being washed away by foreign ways of behavior. We've lost a tremendous diversity in culture and knowledge. And this is also due to the fact that for many developed countries, especially in the North and Europe, culture is arts, music. And in our countries in Latin America, culture is about that glue that brings communities together, that makes a community different than from another one, that makes Costa Ricans different from Germans or from Japanese. So we need to really develop that awareness of our common origin and our mutual belonging, and that the future has to be shared with everyone. And this is from the Earth Charter. We need regenerative politics. We need to engage youth in active political positions, and hopefully women, hopefully young women. We need to get definitely I used to say the old white guys like me out of politics. Now I have to say the old white and orange guys out of politics, and bring young women to start managing. They have the feminine principle well developed, which some males could also develop if they want to, and a lot of them have. But we need that really new sense of care and belonging. And the spiritual dimension, which academics really are shy of, and many of them mix it with religion, but it's that new phase of humanity, the new reverence for life, and that deep consciousness, the mindfulness, the ethics, the values. Most of our problems today are related to ethics and to greed, and to a lack of consciousness that we are all the same. So this has to be brought in together holistically over a territory. And I'd love to go into detail, but I can't. It's multidimensional, multi-sectoral, and requires a different way of thinking. So we need to move away from the reductionist process of thinking, starting by recognizing that nature is the most important component. So it's not about protected areas and polar bears and panda bears. It's actually by generating the capacity for the planet to keep on thriving and keeping us alive. And that new symbiotic relationship with nature has to benefit all of life forms. And it's about measuring this different. I mean, GDP never measured development and still being used to compare countries. It's actually the gross domestic problem we have today that economists have been shaped to think on those linear development process. And we're seeing that right now. The private sector is forcing the government to be able to bounce back and take away any environmental regulations that could slow the process of recovery. But we don't want to bounce back to that system. So we really need to measure development by using happiness, enlightenment, education, transparency, equality. We need to move to a well-being society. And this means that our system has to be changed from the educational part. I mean, we're taught to compete. We're talking about destroying our competitors to be successful. We're talking about greed. We're talking about, just the game of money above all other things. And we need to move to a co-learning, co-creating system where a farmer that has never gone to school has a word as well as a Nobel Peace Prize or a Nobel Prize in many fields. So it's that co-creation amongst us and focus on cooperation, on responsibility, on creativity, mindfulness, etc. We founded the Regeneration Costa Rica Hub in 2018 in July to be able to reverse our footprint and have our ecological capacity above our current consumption. This was done with many, many partners, and we actually started at a bioregional level with Agua y Paz, that's a biosphere in the northern part of Costa Rica. Then we had Saegre, then we had Osa, Talamanca, and other parts of the country, and then slowly moved on to a national initiative. This has one important component, which is education capacity development. For example, last year we started the first global program on regenerative entrepreneurship, where students are actually exposed to some of the best thinkers on the planet to see their different visions and try to actually harvest all of this into a new dimension, new profession, new opportunities, and network with the regenerative communities, network throughout different countries, and establishing let's say a planetary network for learning and co-creation to find these solutions. And we want to register that instead of having degrees hanging on the wall, which really don't mean much in the future, having a passport for the students to be able to demonstrate what their achievements are, their connections, their networking. And I just hope that in 10 years, my 8-year-old son can come up and say, "Dad, thanks for having tried to leave me a better planet." I hope he can say, "Thanks for giving me a better planet," but I just don't want him to come and ask me why I mortgaged the last chance he had of living in a great place. So we need to celebrate that life. And this is the last sentence of the Earth Charter. And I finish with this. So thank you.
Oh, incredible, Eduard. Thank you. Thank you both. And, regarding the application of blue marble thinking, this is not just about measurement and assessment, which we often think evaluation lives within. It really speaks to exactly what you've been talking about regarding leadership. What does it mean to actually lead in a way that is all about understanding transformation towards a world that we want to not just live in now, but as you say, Eduard, to set up for future generations, to become stewards of a planet, which really is a transformational idea. So there's a couple of key principles, and I'm going to actually send in the chat box a link to the website that has all these principles outlined. So if people are new to this, they can connect to this. But there's global thinking, which you both have beautifully illustrated. The context of the world within which we're in, the Anthropocene, with issues like global pandemics, biodiversity loss, all sorts of human health and issues of institutional racism that we're sensing a lot of now. These are coming to the fore. But another core principle is this transformative engagement. And you both spoke very articulately about the kinds of engagement that you're doing in your locations. How would you like to learn from each other as an example of cross-network connection? What in your mind would be a transformative way of learning from each other? So I'm going to open it back to the conversation really between you both to ask questions of each other. What would you like to learn of the other's pathway, the journey, the trekking towards regeneration?
I'd love to say ladies first, but Isabel, I have listening to you, I have a urgent question, which is something I've been dealing with, and how you mentioned it lightly. How do you get to common priorities? I mean, our current system, everybody has their own priority, and it's very difficult to engage them in a direction, in a movement, because everybody's pulling to their side. And there's another issue which is very critical, is that people don't know what they don't know. So sometimes you go to a community and ask them, okay, what do you want? And they'll say what they want. And maybe they're lacking knowledge because there are other alternatives, other possibilities that they ignore that could be a lot better for them. So that participatory process, in my experience, hasn't really been successful unless you already work with the community and have already not told them what to do, not given them the recipes, but actually made them look at the reality of their community and plan the vision. And often when we've done these exercises, especially at the biosphere reserve level, which I've worked with for 25 years now, establish a common vision, people, usually elders, will come up with a list of current problems that are solved. And I've come to find that if you bring youth in, and I'm talking about 8-year-old, 10-year-olds, they can dream. Old people cannot dream anymore. That's washed away. So if we really want to build that better vision, we need to bring in these kids. And for these kids to be able to even think, they need hope. So developing hope and saying, yes, you don't have to sit and wait to adapt to planetary collapse. We can do the change, and let's build it together. I see that's the way of engaging. So how do you actually manage to align all these different groups of people to think on a common future?
That is a fantastic question, Eduard. It's the $1 million question, and we need to figure out how to do that. Because we can't do that, we can't make change happen. But I agree with what you're saying. I mean, I think what we're doing is working with the fabric of what we have here. Fortunately, we have a county council that's declared a climate emergency. We have cities that have declared climate emergencies, even parish councils declaring climate emergencies. So we're working with that. People know that there's an emergency. They want to do something about it. So we have an in there. We can kind of work with what's already there. We have an associate on the Bioregional Learning Centre team called Joseph Rose, who's 25, 26, who's actually a councillor in our local regional council. So he's a young politician. He set up, or helped to set up, the Fridays for Future movement here in the Southwest. So he is very keen on bringing young people on board and doing education projects. So we have those ways in, if you like. We're also working with Plymouth University, with some great educators there who are very interested in how you can make education more relevant and kind of take it outside the university into the region. And we'd love to, or we talk about South Devon as a learning region, saying we don't have the answers. We don't actually know how we're going to turn this all around, but we want to make people excited about the idea that they can learn. So I think that on the one hand, you've got a whole learning process, kind of bringing the information that we need, waking people up, but then you've got another process that goes hand in hand with that, which is just building excitement, saying we can do this and getting the kind of can-do vibe going so people recognize that they've got a role. However small it is, they can make a difference. And I really see that need for being celebrated and witnessed at making a difference. I think that actually is a kind of pretty key way forward.
Another thing that has come very often to the table is how do we get people to unlearn?
Yeah, good.
And especially academics. I mean, they're in their silos and they see, I mean, the whole system, Western system of science is biased. I mean, how much hate has been put upon cattle. And we have all this holistic science that says that cattle can actually capture carbon, put it in the soil a lot more efficiently and out of the hand of fire, where forests put in the biomass, and climate change is affecting forest growth. But we still have this movement, global movement, to get rid of cattle, when actually cattle historically were the ones that really brought carbon down from the atmosphere and made us having a living condition. So it's not the cow, but the how. But try to negotiate. I mean, even Cristiana Figueres, who managed to sign the Paris Agreement, she's totally fighting cattle production because of that reductionist vision. And we see this in many different, I mean, at the pre-COP for the UNF Climate Change Convention last year, I organized a side event on the role of soil carbon. And I had lots of scientists say, that's a waste of time because we still don't have proof on how much carbon. Yeah, it's a variable thing and it releases, and it's a changing. So that dynamic process doesn't fit with a linear mentality. So how do you unlearn? How can you move people to actually open up their minds to new paradigms and new ideas?
Well, I like what you say about unlearning. I think that's important. I think it's hard to get academics who've been doing it for a long time to unlearn. You can definitely get, you know, kids and young adults to unlearn. Yeah, okay, the challenge is to think in complex ways, to think in complexity, and we haven't been taught how to do that. So actually that's one of my questions for you, Eduard. How did you come to be able to grapple? How did your mind come to be able to grapple with these issues in the way that you're doing? How do we teach that? I think it comes back to us, if we can model it.
Well, I had to found my own university 26 years ago to be able to do that. It was just impossible within the regular system. And I'm still fighting government to get programs approved because they say, oh, the graduates from this program don't have a professional college to work with. You know, they don't fit here, they don't fit there. So we're not going to approve it because they don't have possibilities for jobs later on. So we still have that rigid mindset within the academic field. The way we've done is actually, that's why we're working at the bioregional level. So you apply the different levels, you apply the functional landscapes, you apply society, economics, culture, politics, and spirituality at the local level, and you work through the disciplines, not from the disciplines.
Yeah.
So you actually identify true, real problems and bring all the different people together to work simultaneously in solving the problem.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I have found to really get transdisciplinary work done. But it requires an educational process because you sit these different experts on the table from zero and you talk about soccer because they don't even have a common language. So you have to break that first. And that has taken me 2 decades with my teachers. We have had to educate our own teachers to be able to work with us because if we bring somebody new from outside, they just don't get it. They want to go back to their comfort zone. I don't know.
So no,
Glenn, should we hand back to you? We should leave time for questions, right?
Well, just to say, yeah, this has been wonderful. And the chat box has been in some ways blowing up with really good conversations around the topics that you're both bringing up. So I'm just going to bring in some voices from the chat box. This is from Kaya Ambrose. And she says, perhaps for both, so this is really to both of you, it's clear that there are champions, and I imagine eventually converts to co-create these pathways and priorities. But how do you bring on board those who challenge and potentially block, or the change phobics, the ones who are concerned and basically holding you back? So how do you bring in the skeptics and the roadblocks into the process?
Okay, well, I would say, briefly, I'll jump in here. I'd say you have to talk to them in their own language. Our way of doing it would be to work with people in that sector who would be able to show them a different way of doing things. But I do think that conflict resolution and holding this kind of, this messy process, it's all messy, it's all changing all the time. Just the capacity to be able to kind of create containers where you can hold different viewpoints is incredibly important.
I actually got tired of fighting the system. And there I follow Buckminster Fuller's recommendation to build a better one instead of fighting the system. And if that better one is really better, people will move slowly into the new system or quicker into the new system. And I think that's what COVID has given us, the opportunity for people to realize that the school teachers that kept their kids busy away from them and now they're homeschooling are very important in our lives, that good quality food is very important, and that the Mercedes-Benz or Lamborghini is in the garage is irrelevant. So we have a window of opportunity now to build that better system. And according to statistics, we need 3.5%, 4%, 5%, 6% of the population to start moving in that direction. And I think we're almost there. We at least have people that are sensible to the need of change, and we just have to build quickly positive examples, especially for the younger people. Look, forget the regular curriculum. Don't worry to get a profession to hang a piece of cardboard on the wall, which won't prepare you or is not going to prepare you for the challenges that come ahead. Let's build these new capacities moving ahead and start really building that new future.
Well, one of the great opportunities of the process of assessment and measurement is to share the learning, across cultural domains, and to do it quickly. Now, sadly, the field of evaluation actually contributes to the problem. The field of evaluation can be very reductionist, very much one group has its own sort of frame and methodologies and another group has a very different one. One of the things we've been talking about from a Blue Marble standpoint, and as we think about regeneration and the pathways to regeneration, is to create a common meta framework that could be applied at virtually every place, but it has a cultural uniqueness and a customization that is basically custom to the issues that matter most to the people of the place. Now that we're in the process of building that, but do you both see any value in that, in the essentially applying basically a common language at a sort of a high level, so you're able to learn and connect around progress and lessons learned, but also to share the stories that are truly unique and of the place? So I'm going to ask you both, is that of interest, and if so, why?
I'd say it's of great interest. One of the things we want to do is professionalize this role of being a leader of systems change. And I can really see ways in which Blue Marble would assist with that. Where Blue Marble, if you're able to assess how we see change happening, how we kind of understand how change happens in a qualitative way, not just a quantitative way. And obviously to be able to speak to funders and say, this is what we've achieved, and using Blue Marble as a way to do that, because we know that funders are not adept at the moment at being able to assess the success or achievements of systems change. I can see how that would really work.
Yeah, beautifully said.
Yeah.
Eduard?
Having done a lot of work with international cooperation agencies and bilateral, multilateral agencies, World Bank, and so on, their really reductionist process of evaluation is what really does not allow those projects to be successful. And I think that has been carried on to the funding sources. So what we've done till today has been out of our own pockets. It has been almost impossible till today to get funding to do this type of work for us in this region. It just doesn't tick the boxes of the donors. So I think it's tied, and that's why I think by putting the Blue Marble evaluation throughout the Regenerative Communities Network, and hopefully we can bring other networks to work together. I mean, I see so many parallel initiatives today wanting the same, and everybody's looking at their belly button. How do we actually open to a huge global network of networks and have something like Blue Marble evaluation cut across? And that's what I mentioned at the beginning with being able to compare results. Every bioregion will be different, the indicators will be different, but we need some sort of metric to show progress. We have some specific metrics, like we're going to be measuring soil carbon at the beginning of the projects and then every 3 to 5 years, and be able to say to the convention, look, we're fixing so many tons of carbon with cattle, so you don't have to fight cattle all the time. We need to measure biodiversity. We need to measure social progress. We can use a social progress index, just move away from GDP and the other statistics. But then we need a more holistic way of, and that's exactly where I see the Blue Marble evaluation coming in and giving us the power to actually not only convince those naysayers and those obstacles you asked before, but actually to bring, and that's what really worries me, or where my efforts are going, bring more people into this movement.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that, I mean, I won't even go into the details of all the places I've been at, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the Global Business and Biodiversity Partnership. Most of these big, strong organizations, corporations are not willing to move at the moment. There's a lot of greenwash. So fighting them is just irrelevant. We need to really have a different way of proving that we're moving forward. And I think that's where we can work together at a global scale. And that's going back to Isabel. I think, yeah, we need to professionalize it, but it cannot be within one school. We have to really do global programs. And I realized this, I mean, in 1995, 1996, because I founded the university in 94, and bringing 20 kids into Costa Rica for 2 years was just absurd. So we went online already in 1996 to be able to reach out. We're now in over 60 countries, but we need to really scale this up. And the only way to scale it is through cooperation again. So we need all organizations that are in this movement. How many regenerative universities are there? I think we're probably the only one at the moment, but we need to have all of these, at least some departments working on regeneration throughout the planet to really scale this up. We need millions of people that understand this and understand where to move forward. A lot of the problems with the current movements is they're pointing fingers at the people who are guilty, but they're not giving solutions. If Greta would have had a speech that says, we have to do this and this and this, instead of saying, you're guilty, you're guilty, you're guilty. And it's your fault. I grew up with a cell phone, but it's not my fault. So I support her totally, but we need to bring a different language to these movements and say, let's do this. Let's look at the labels. Let's not consume something that goes across a planet with a huge footprint. So we can actually start with small things that don't require the inverse triangles I showed. Start with the easy, low-hanging fruit. Let's not go to the complex issues. I'm not going to fight electric cars in our decarbonization strategy at the country level. They're not sustainable. Okay, but if people, it doesn't matter, but let's start with something else that really can move forward.
Yeah, beautifully said. There's some wonderful comments. This is from Katie Boone, and she really is speaking to that issue of that global network you were just describing, Eduard. And she was saying, and she actually references a person who was on the learning journey in South Devon. So she says, yes, how do we open to a huge global network of networks? Regenesis Group and their regenerative practitioner program, close to 600 people have gone through this course across the globe. They're working on this, as well as Laura Storm and Giles Hutchins with Regenerative Leadership as a book, and the Regenerator's Journey, Laura Sturm and Jenny Anderson. And again, Jenny Anderson was actually on the learning journey in South Devon. So that's a great example of, we need many of these networks of networks to come to actually to step into this opportunity. So let me turn it back to you both, perhaps for your final thoughts on ways to take this forward, to scale up and to learn from the different programs and projects and efforts and initiatives that are going on around the globe.
Well, I think not surprisingly, it's about working at these different levels, continuing to work both local and global. I think we've got to come up with compelling case studies locally that make people globally want to dive in and see how to do it in their own place. And there needs to be funding for people to start up new centers, whatever you want to call them, or universities. And there needs to be a kind of support structure to bring more people on board. And I think it's happening. I mean, I do see, as Eduard and all of us do, all of these new networks forming, which is very positive. And then we need to have a network of networks without being over-networked.
Yeah, beautifully said. Well, let me turn it back to you, Michael, for some thoughts on the Blue Marble principles. Clearly, the global, the reality of the global realities that we're facing, but the heavily local realities. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as we close out this webinar.
Well, I certainly have been struck in my own work by the importance in talking with local people about the global local connection. Being based in Minnesota, where the last glacier melted, the state motto is a land of 10,000 lakes. 87% of the population goes fishing at least once a year, and the state fish is the walleye. And people are not being told that a 2 degrees Fahrenheit rise in temperature in the lakes in Minnesota will wipe out the walleye. That gets their attention. That's something that they care about. And I'm finding there's interest in new findings about the extent of plastic in the Mississippi River and in the Great Lakes that folks haven't been aware of. And so finding that angle into what they care about locally, they're, for the most part, the local folks I'm engaged with are not abstract thinkers, but they need help in the things, as you said, Eduard, that they haven't fully conceptualized the relevance of. I'm in an area where the Agricultural Extension Service just reclassified a year ago from the growing zone in the US from zone 3 to zone 4. There are only 8 growing zones in the US. A whole zone of change for the first time in 200 years, changes what nurseries provide, changes what people can garden, changes the vegetables they grow. That gets their attention, but they don't know they don't connect that with the larger picture of what's going on. So I do think that one of the ways we can network around with your examples is for all of us to be able to share these concrete examples of the leverage point of conversation. What's the 1 or 2 examples in each of our places that get people's attention about how this is showing up locally to help them make the global connection? And we get better at those narratives. What does spark the interest and makes a difference to people? That becomes the segue to those larger pieces. So thank you so much for sharing your examples and your inspiration, and we move forward with these challenges together. Thanks for organizing this, Glenn.
Yeah, and just want to say that our next webinar is on July 10th, and we're going to focus on one of the conversations, one of the issues that matters most, which is finance, the issue of how do we actually work with large asset owners, those in sovereign wealth, the insurance industry, and massive pension funds. How to actually take that kind of resource and invest in large-scale transformation. So putting a blue marble lens on significant issues of regenerative finance. So that's on July 10th. It'll be 11 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, which is 3 p.m. UTC. So stay tuned to the Blue Marble Network and you'll hear more about that. But I just want to say thank you so much to our guests, Isabel Carlisle and Eduard Müller, because really what they've done is they put a spotlight on the opportunities that are surfacing all around us of deep engagement. And we need this kind of radical leadership to bring this work further forward. So Isabel and Eduard, thank you so much. And we'll be sharing more information about ways to deepen the role of bioregionalism. So thank you all so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Safe, everyone.
Thank you for the invitation.